In 1788, the U.S. Constitution was ratified with a few central ideas driving it. Arguably the most important of these is the concept of checks and balances. No one person or branch of government can wield too much power. But after nearly 250 years, does this still hold true? Or is one branch of government seized more power over time? Well, to understand and identify executive overreach, we must first understand what powers the executive branch is supposed to wield. Article 2 of the Constitution vests executive power in the hands of the President. This includes military command and the power to grant pardons and make treaties with the approval of Congress. Moreover, the President is also in charge of appointing people to his administration and to federal committees and commissions such as the Federal Reserve. That being said, it is important to note that the Constitution gives Congress the sole power to declare war through the War Powers Clause. Executive power has certainly evolved since the Constitution was signed. For example, over time, presidents have signed more and more executive orders. Ulysses S. Grant signed 217 executive orders during his 8 years. Before him, no president had signed more than 80.
Every president since George Washington has issued executive orders and taken executive actions. But you have to, keep them within a fair legal bound. There's always a question of degree. Is it too much or is it too little?
We can also find evidence of this in Bush's wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Obama's conflict with ISIS, and Trump's Syria airstrikes.
Under the Constitution, and for very specific reasons, we were not supposed to have offensive war initiated unless by vote of Congress.
It is true that in the modern era without war declaration, Congress typically passes an authorization of military force, or AUMF. An AUMF gives the president powers to, use military force. That being said, some of these conflicts have not just been uses of military force. Iraq and Afghanistan were labeled wars.
I do think that when you see sometimes that a president needs to be checked by the legislative branch with regard to war powers, our system evolves a little bit over time, but the fact is that it is malleable, but we have this core value of honoring the Constitution.
Ultimately, these examples suggest that executive power has grown, perhaps unconstitutionally, especially in the past 70 years. The Korean War in the early 1950s was the first conflict in American history in which Congress did not declare war. Since then, every armed conflict has been started by the president. It is possible that without several presidents unconstitutionally initiating military conflict, the country could avoid war, most notably the wildly unpopular Vietnam War. Finally, we can look to the recent net neutrality debate. Mozilla reports that in a recent poll, 76% of Americans support current net neutrality regulations. Despite this fact, the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, repealed net neutrality rules.
We will call the vote. Commissioner Clyburn.
I dissent.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Aye.
Commissioner Carr.
Aye.
Commissioner Rosenworcel.
I dissent.
The chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks to the staff for your terrific work on this item.
It is crucial to note that 3 members of the FCC, including the chairman, were appointed by President Trump. The other 2 members were appointed by former President Obama. So, the question stands. Did the executive branch overstep its boundaries by repealing popular regulations and going against public opinion? If so, what can we do to prevent executive overreach in the future? While we're exploring the expansion of the president's power, we must also acknowledge how that power has not only expanded, but evolved with the turn of the century. Individuals can garner thousands, even millions of supporters through social media. In President Trump's case, he used the power to make public declarations and claims through Twitter, reaching over 21 million users. Trump has grown infamous for his brevity on Twitter, bringing about new conflicts, arms races, and threats of war. At what point does his social media presence need to be checked by other branches and committees? It's hard to argue that executive power has not grown since the Constitution was first written. Some believe that, in order to offset these changes, new checks and balances must be established in order to prevent corruption. Virginia Senator Tim Kaine has been a longtime advocate for limiting executive power, especially with regard to declaring war.
I think the Article 1 and Article 2 powers have shifted over time where Congress has abdicated a lot of responsibilities and allowed those decisions to be made by the executive in a way that we shouldn't. But really, presidents of both parties have kind of devolved to a notion where the president often believes, I'm not constrained, I can do anything I want. And I view that as very dangerous to the country. President Obama began U.S. military involvement in a military campaign against Libya without a vote of Congress. President Obama started an offensive war against ISIS without a vote of Congress. President Trump has fired missiles at Syria without claiming that the U.S. was at all at threat. It seems like the practice these days is administrations feel like they have war-making power, which they don't, and I fault administrations for that, but I fault Congress even more.
While members of Congress like Tim Kaine make a compelling case against executive power, there are some believe that it's advantageous for the country. Former Press Secretary Sean Spicer believes that the current Trump administration has used executive powers responsibly and wisely. He openly defends Trump's use of executive power, whether it be an executive order or a presidential memorandum. This is a sentiment shared by many in the Trump administration. Ultimately, they believe that the president is justified in acting unilaterally when exercising executive powers. In other words, it's imperative for the country to have a strong president. America was built on the concept that in a group of people with diverse points of view, each point of view should be heard. While that concept still stands strong today, are voices being heard or ignored? Let's go to Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, and see just that.
Basically, it's like the president deciding on his or her own what should be done with the U.S.
I would define it as like presidential power and like anything that they see fit to help the country, I guess.
It really does not go through Congress, doesn't go through the judiciary system.
That's fine in emergencies where we're threatened, but in other situations, this executive power can be quite harmful.
I think the latest administration it's using it for the wrong way.
I think that it is very critical that the president have the right to override a poor decision.
It says that it's government for the people, by the people, but a man that loses by 2,861,000 votes can actually be declared president of the United States.
When that executive goes evil and makes statements that are racist and things like that, he's almost impossible to stop.
That's executive power run amok.
After reviewing all of this, it's safe to say that executive power has expanded unchecked for decades. But it all boils down to public opinion. Should we work to limit executive power? Or is increased executive power helping the country progress in an era where partisanship has halted legislative action? The choice is yours. As a citizen and as a constituent, it is you who can make the most change.